So hi everyone, welcome back to my channel and I hope you guys are doing fine, and we're going to be doing an eyeshadow palette review today, and this is going to be a review of the UCANBE Exotic Flavors eyeshadow palette, and this was sent to me maybe around like 4 months before, and I have been trying this. I have a lot of looks created with this palette and a lot of them are on my Instagram page and some of them are on my YouTube page too, so I'm going to link that down below. And I do have a lot of looks using this one, so make sure you check out all the other tutorials using this palette before we get started with this review. So when you open the palette, there are 48 shades inside them and there is literally like a huge color story going on. So I'm pretty sure that if you want something colorful, then this might help you out. So these are manufactured in China and these are cruelty free and they contain 72 grams of product in them, which is actually a lot considering a lot of other palettes. So now that we're done speaking about the basic parameters, let's talk about something which is slightly more important and essential, which is the formulation. So speaking about formulation, the first thing I'm going to speak about is pigmentation. So when it comes to pigmentation, you know me, I am very choosy when it comes to pigmentation and consistency about the pigmentation. So when you look at this palette, there are a lot of shades which are extremely pigmented, and I would literally say that that is something which is amazing, especially at the price point that you're getting it for the number of shades. And the other factor is that there are a couple of duds in this palette which are totally not pigmented. They're very chalky and they do kind of like, they just kind of come off and they do not like, they just don't get on your brush and they don't get on your lid, and if it does get on your lid, it's basically a wash of color. So when you consider that, I would say that, you know, like maybe around like out of 48 colors in this, around 35 of them are really good. They're very pigmented and they're like really good. And then the rest of them are a couple of duds. So you might have to, you know, like you might have to consider this when you're going to get it. But considering the price point, I think that's kind of at a really good cost. The next factor is blendability. And when you look at the blendability of this palette, I would say that this one blends like a dream. These aren't like anything, you know, like these aren't like your pro pigments which are really hard to blend. These blend beautifully, and even if you're a beginner, you wouldn't have any difficulty using this palette. So it's a thumbs up from my side when it comes to blendability. So the third factor that we're going to be speaking about is layering, and layering with this palette works really well. I did not have any problem when I was layering these shades, and I do tend to layer my shades around 2 times when I'm going in for any eyeshadow look, and I didn't have any problems when I did mix 2 different colors from 2 different color stories. If you see my previous tutorials, you would find that I'm mixing a lot of different colors like blues and reds and, you know, blues and greens, and I did not have any problem when I was layering them. So I think that is a great thing from an eyeshadow palette, and that is something which I love. So we're going to talk about the next 2 parameters which go hand in hand, which is fallout and kickback. So coming to the fallout of this eyeshadow palette, I barely noticed any fallout. I mean, there was a little bit of fallout, but if you use a really good eyeshadow primer with the right techniques, you could actually minimize the fallout. And even with the darker, deeper shades like this blue or this brown here, I did not really experience a lot of fallout, which is a great thing. So when you talk about the kickback in this palette, I would say the neons in this one did have a bit of kickback, and the yellows and the greens, there was a bit of kickback, but like nevertheless, like I think that was very minimal, and it depends on how you're taking your product. And the other products, like all the other shades in this palette, they did not have like a lot of kickback. It was just very normal and very less, which I think is a great thing when it comes to formulation, because it was also very blendable. Like I totally love, you know, like this entire part of it and this part of it. Like these are so buttery. I have like literally no words for how buttery it is. I really like the way that it's very finely milled, and even when I use my Be Perfect palette, the Be Perfect Carnival palette, it does have like some chunks which just sit in the palette and you just kind of have to like dig it and kind of squash it and take it. But in this palette, I did not have that issue at all, and I have been using this for quite some time, so I've gotten over the top layer of it and I've started going like into the deeper part of the eyeshadow. So coming to how well these picked up on a brush, I would say that all the mattes over here, they picked up beautifully on a brush. I did not have any problem even with the lightest shade in this palette. It is so pigmented. I did not have any chalkiness, nothing when I was blending it, except for the neons. I'm not going to talk about the neons right now. I'll speak about like separately. So I'm talking about the rest of the palette. These worked beautifully. Even the glitters and the shimmers, they just look so beautiful on your eye. They adhere really well and they do not fall off. They come really well on your brush, which I think is a great thing for an eyeshadow palette. So another thing that I want to talk about is that there is no smell in this, and thank goodness for that. And we're also going to talk about the consistency like throughout the palette. So when you speak about consistency of like the formulation, and as I mentioned, I totally love the mattes in this, and if I say I love mattes, it means it's really good. So the mattes in this are beautiful, but then like the neons in this entire row, they are a little patchy. They do not look like the way it looks here on your eye. Like, I mean, if you just use this orange, it's just gonna look like a wash of color on your eye. It does not really adhere well. It's the same with the green, and it's the same with, you know, like with these four colors. The purple is slightly better, but the, you know, like this four colors, they do not really work great. So I think that is one thing which was slightly inconsistent with this palette, but nevertheless the other shimmers, the mattes, everything works beautifully in this palette. And this palette is majority of mattes, and if you're someone who loves matte and you want a lot of colorful mattes, this one is great for you. So coming to how they have laid out the colors in this palette, I kind of really like that one. So you have like one row of like, you know, like very neutral tones, and then you have a row of warms, like, you know, like oranges, and then you have pinks, you have yellows, and then you have greens, you have purples, you have blues. So for those of you who find it hard to, you know, like when, like suppose if you have a palette where all the colors are literally like not arranged in a certain color family, and if you don't like that, then this one would really help, especially if you have an OCD to the way the colors need to be arranged. So if you have like if you just want the colors to be placed in terms of the intensity of this, I think I mean I would definitely say that they did a really good job at the way they've placed the colors. This makes it all the more easier and all the more helpful. You don't have to literally search, and you don't have to literally understand which two colors will look, you know, like better together. So that is not a problem with this palette, which is something which is quite amazing. So just as how there were a lot of advantages, it does come in with a little disadvantages. So speaking about it, the first one is that when it comes to this, you know, like any certain row, if you pick any row in this palette, the colors in this palette, like I feel like they have so many shades, but I feel certain shades look too similar on the eyes. For example, you have these two pinks which look really similar on the eye. You have these two shades which look really similar, and you have this yellow and this yellow, and honestly, and this one. So honestly, on when you start using it on your eye, it does not make a big of a difference. So I genuinely feel that they could have had somewhat deeper tones. Like if you have, I mean, they don't have a black in this palette, or if they have a brown, this brown isn't even like that intense of a brown. So when you look at the colors in terms of intensity, I would say that more or less they're all more on the like dark to medium, and then medium to light and light intensity, but there's nothing dark. Like we don't have anything extremely dark except for this blue. Like I really like this one, and even the brown isn't like that deep as I mentioned. So the next parameter we're going to talk about is the user experience. So in my opinion, I would say that this is really good. I made about like 10 looks using this palette, and I think these worked really well. I did not have any issue when I was like doing a look, except for like one look which kind of got a little messed up because the color just did not show up the way I wanted it to show up, which was the issue with the neons in the palette. But other than that, like every single time I think of a look, like I think of the way it would look, and it would turn up the same way from the palette. So it does deliver whatever you want, which in my opinion is a great thing. So when I was using this palette, I did not experience any skipping with the shades, and like especially the glitters. I mean, the glitters are beautiful. Like for some reason I really like the glitters. They aren't like really chunky, they're very fine like the glitters, but they're quite like on the finer side of glitters. So I kind of like that about this palette. And the shimmers, they're beautiful, they're very foiled looking, so they're not like that shimmery sparkly type. They're very foiled, and also the mattes in this palette, they worked really well. There was no skipping, and they blended really well between like the layers, which was great. So we're almost done, and the next parameter we're going to talk about is the lasting power. So when you speak about lasting power of this palette, I would say that I barely had any issues. Like I was surprised, but I mean, in spite of it being so soft, and it's not even a pigment palette, like it's not a pro pigment palette, but in spite of it, I did not have any issues with the lasting power. And I do use an eyeshadow base before I do my eyeshadow. There was no such thing like, like the colors kind of disappear in the crease, or, the shimmers kind of vanish. So I did not have any issues such as that with this palette, which I think is great. And I think if you're looking for something for brides and you want something a little more on the inexpensive side, but you just want a set of colors, think this would work, you know, with other palettes, because this palette does not have any inner corner highlight shade, or does not have any extreme deepening shades. So this can be like a palette with another palette, like an add-on palette, like a colorful add-on palette. So for such situations, this would be great. We're like almost done, and we're going to finally do the swatches of this palette. And I'm not going to swatch it like horizontal like how I usually do. I'm going to swatch it vertical because I want you to see how the colors look in the same color family. So I'm going to do like row by row. So stay tuned, and it's going to be a little long, but check it out. I hope you guys enjoyed the swatches, and that was a huge task to do. And coming to my personal opinion about this palette, I would say that if you're someone who's looking for an affordable, colorful palette, and if you're just starting out with a colorful palette, like you don't have any other colorful palette, then this one should be a great one for you to try. But if you're someone who has maybe like around 3, 4, 5, you know, like colorful palettes, and if you want this one, then it might be a little too similar and repetitive. But nevertheless, if you're someone who enjoys like really blendable kind of colors, and you're just starting with colors and you just want to play around, this would be a great buy for you. And if you ask in my opinion, who would actually enjoy this palette, and who would find this palette to be like worthy of the cost and money, I think anyone who does not have a colorful, you know, like a colorful palette in this color range, and you're looking for something affordable, I think you would enjoy this palette. So if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and give me a big thumbs up, and share it, you know, like to all of your friends and anyone who would find this useful. So I'll catch up with you guys for another review, and until next time, bye.